I'm going to do an overview of Chapter 1, Biology, the Science of Life. First thing you do need to understand, we all tend to understand the definition of biology, which of course deals with living things or living organisms, which is important. It's the scientific study of life. But we also need to understand that along with biology, we have to talk about the different characteristics of life, starting with the smallest and going to the most complex. Okay, and in this case, the smallest, of course, is going to be your cell. The cell is the smallest unit of life. Organisms may be unicellular or multicellular organisms. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later in this chapter and in future chapters as well. When it comes to multicellular organisms, we think about animals that have multiple cells or many cells, such as your plants, your fungi, and your animals. Unicellular organisms, on the other hand, they have only one cell, such as your bacteria. However, there are a group of organisms that can be both multicellular and unicellular, such as your protista or your protozoans. They will fall under that category. And if you go up from your cell, you're going to have your tissues. And before I proceed, look on page 3 of your textbook, figure 1.2. They have the levels starting with the smallest and going all the way up to the biosphere. The smallest is actually the atom, but the atom and molecules are not considered living organisms. And so the smallest in this case is going to be your cell, because it is a living structure. From your cells, we're going to have your tissues. When you have 2 or more cells that are similar, it's going to actually become a tissue. Tissues, on the other hand, 2 or more tissues will become an organ. So, for example, the heart, as we know, is an organ when you have because it's made up of multiple tissues. Organs become organ systems when you have a group of organs that are working together, such as your heart, your blood vessels, your veins, things of that nature. You have an organ system, or you have systems. The next thing we're going to talk about, so this is 1.2, your levels of biological organization. Now, there are certain things that living organisms require. We require energy, okay? In order for us to go about our daily routine, we can't sustain ourselves or maintain life unless we have certain energy. And where do we get our energy from? We get our energy from the food, the building blocks and energy resources. So energy, there are 2 subcategories of food. It gives us energy, which is the capacity to do work by us. And of course, you have metabolism, all the chemical reactions that occur within the cell in order for it to function properly as well. The main source of energy for all living organisms is the sun. And we all know that plants make their food by a process called photosynthesis. So solar energy is the main source of energy because it allows plants to transform that solar energy into the chemical energy of what we call food. Now, life requires materials and energy continue. Homeostasis, the maintenance of internal conditions within certain boundaries, regardless of the external conditions. Maybe behavior, moving to a warmer area. That's considered homeostasis. May not require conscious activity. Liver releases stored sugar. So conscious activity would be, I like to give examples of homeostasis is, when we go outside and if the temperature is, let's say, for example, last week, the temperature was in the 20s and your 30s. Okay, but because we have a body temperature of 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, we're able to actually, regardless of the 21 degrees or the 35 degrees outside, our body temperature is going to remain the same. Okay, so how does it do the adjustment? That's our internal condition. We're going to shiver when we go outside if we're not layered up when it's 21 degrees outside or 39 degrees. So that's a really, really good example of homeostasis. Also, you can actually look at how this is the solar energy that we talked about earlier, how chemicals actually get recycled. Okay, solar energy, of course, that energy, the energy flow is going to be one way. It goes from the sun to the producers, okay, which would be your plants, things of that nature, to the consumers. In this case, it's going to be the, looks like that's an eagle or something, which is going to be a consumer. And of course, a consumer is someone that's going to feed on the other organism. Okay, now, when that consumer feeds on the other organism, okay, then you're going to have decomposers, which would be your bacteria. They actually will, that organism that's dead that you see on the ground is going to decompose with the assistance of bacteria, and of course it's going to be recycled back into the environment. And of course some of that energy is going to be released back into the environment, as you can see, as heat. So that would be a good example. So you have plants, okay, then you're going to have your bacteria. So when consumers feed on other organisms, and that organism is going to die, it's going to get recycled back into the soil or the environment by your decomposers, which would be considered the bacteria. Plants, then you have your bacteria, and then of course you're going to have your consumer in the system, which would be the eagle or the bird that you see. Living organisms, they respond to changes in their environment. Ability to respond often results in movement. So for example, if you think about the monarch butterfly, when it starts getting really, really cold in certain states, the monarch butterfly is going to travel and move away from that particular state, and he's going to start flying. They're going to start flying south to warmer climates because that's the type of climates that they prefer. Responding to changes in our environment would be us, our body temperature changing when it's 39 degrees outside. Of course, our body temperature is going to start dropping, but when we shiver, our body temperature is going to go back up to the 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit in order for us to survive regardless of the changes in the environment. For example, a plant, especially those that prefer sunlight, if you put a plant near a window, of course the plant is going to respond to the sunlight because it's going to start leaning more towards that window because the sun is coming inside of that window. Often animals, such as, for example, when animals that live in extremely cold environments, such as a penguin, for example, a penguin has excess body weight or body fat on its body. That's his way of responding to the changes in the environment, which is the extremely cold weather, in order for it to survive. They reproduce, and of course they develop, they respond, they reproduce. Every living thing can reproduce or make another organism like itself. So bacteria, of course, is going to make another single cell organism identical to itself, which is a bacteria. Multicellular organisms, on the other hand, which will be us, of course, we're going to need an egg and a sperm, which is sexual reproduction, in order to produce what we call an embryo. So the embryo, of course, is going to take our genes that it inherited from both the sperm and the egg, or the mom and the dad, and of course it's going to become a multicellular organism as well. So all organisms, including our cells, were made up of this gene called DNA, which is our blueprint, which is deoxyribose nucleic acid. Of course, DNA is double-stranded, RNA is single-stranded, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more as we move on to other chapters as well. So, living organisms reproduce. They respond to changes in the environment. They actually will, they adapt to changes in their environment, and they are, there are several other characteristics that are involved here as well. So reproduction is a characteristic of life. This double-stranded structure that you see here, this blue structure, is DNA. There are two strands. It's considered a double helix. And of course, as stated earlier, RNA has what you call a single helix or a single-stranded. They adapt. As stated earlier, some hogs catch fish. Others are better at catching rabbits. So in your text, so that's a hog in the textbook, guys, on page, let's see, let me open this textbook. I'm just talking off the top of my head. Yeah, the hawk is on page 4 of your textbook, so they're actually showing you how things are getting recycled. Others are better at catching rabbits. Humans who live at extreme elevations exhibit an adaptation that reduces the amount of hemoglobin in the blood. Who live at extreme elevations that exhibit an adaptation that reduces the amount of hemoglobin. So they have what? Less oxygen in their blood when they live in those extremely high elevations or cold climates. So organization, the diversity of life, organisms are classified based on certain characteristics that they have in common or that they share. Taxonomy is used to classify these organisms, and of course there are categories from your most inclusive to your least inclusive. We're going to talk about the 3 domains. We're going to talk about the kingdoms because, as you can see, they're higher up on the hierarchy. So those are actually talked about over here in your textbook. If you look at figure 1.5, I'm going to go back to this slide here. They're actually showing you the DNA, which of course are genes, the deoxyribonucleic acid, which is the blueprint of life. So the little boy inherited the blueprint or the DNA from his parents, as well as that little girl. This is on page 5 of your textbook. Here are your 3 domains here, which are very important. You have the domain archaea, you have domain bacteria, and of course you have the domain eukarya. So prokaryotes, as you can see, belong to both the domain archaea and of course the domain bacteria. These are unicellular organisms. They do not have a nucleus, but they do have a nucleoid. The domain archaea, of course, are pretty ancient. They were supposedly the first cells on the earth or the planet. Bacteria, domain bacteria, those are pretty much found almost everywhere now. So bacteria can live in the soil. We have bacteria that actually are a part of us. They cohabitate with us. They're on our bodies. Bacteria can live in a refrigerator. They can live in extremely cold environments, extremely hot environments. So they're pretty much everywhere. They can live in foods. They're they're actually put in foods, such as the lactobacillus, of course, is the bacteria that is actually placed in yogurt. You also have the domain eukarya. These are your eukaryotes right here. Now, the domain eukarya, you have, it could be unicellular or multicellular organisms over here. But just remember that the domain archaea, that's where your prokaryotes belong, and your domain bacteria. And here's a really good example here where they're actually showing you the domain RK, capable of living in extreme environments, Dimethylsarcina mazi, a methane generating prokaryote. You can actually see the picture of it there. It produces methane gas. Here they're showing you E. coli. We're all pretty much familiar with E. coli. It's found in our intestinal tract. I mean, that's one of the good bacteria that's found in our gut. And here are your 4 kingdoms, which are just as important. You have the protista, your fungi, plantae, and of course you have your animalia. Okay, now this one, the protist, as I stated before, these are both single-celled and multicellular organisms. They're actually showing you the single-cell euglena, which are small organisms that live in creeks and ponds and things of that nature. Protists can also be multicellular because they also belong to the domain eukarya, which are typically multicellular organisms. Your plants belong to your domain, is a kingdom as well, which belongs to the domain eukarya, and these are multicellular. They're photosynthesizers because they make their food by photosynthesis. And of course you have the kingdom animals, which we belong to, which is a part of the domain eukarya. These are multicellular organisms because we ingest our foods, which means we feed on other organisms, whether plants or other animals, and we're considered Homo sapiens, which is the genus and species for us. So remember, you have 3 domains, archaea, bacteria, and eukarya. Now they're breaking those domains down into kingdoms, and you can see how the kingdoms are showing you how the kingdoms fall under the domains. If you look in your textbooks on page, they have the domains on page 7 of your textbook, bacteria, the archaea, and the eukarya. And of course, I was looking for the kingdoms. They have the kingdoms they also have domains on page 9 you can read about. And of course, your kingdoms are actually on page 10. And the slides that I just went over, they're actually showing you the kingdoms here as well. Okay. And of course, you have your fungi, which are multicellular. They're decomposers as well. And they're showing you the mushroom, which will belong to that. Yeast would also belong to this as well, which is unicellular. So here are your domains and your kingdoms. Know your domains, archaea, bacteria, eukarya. What organisms belong to each domain. You have your prokaryotes for archaea and bacteria, and you have your eukaryotes for the domain eukarya. Be familiar with your kingdoms. Your protists, which are both multicellular and single-celled organisms, your plants, the animals, and of course you have your fungi. Okay, I'm going to conclude this short segment here, which goes all the way up actually to page 10 of your textbook. So this is just an 18-minute long segment. I'm just going to do a short segment or section for you to help you get a better understanding of it, okay?